Matthew Miller, as you know, the much maligned State Department spokesperson, has been absolutely notorious in peddling lies to defend Israeli war crimes in Gaza. One of the lines that he has often repeated has been about the role of UNRWA staff members in the 7th of October attacks. This allegation, originally made by the Israeli government, had prompted the enemy nations of humanity, namely the US, the UK, the EU, Canada, and Australia, to immediately suspend their funding for UNRWA. And I'm calling them enemy nations with full responsibility, since these countries had stopped their funding to UNRWA despite knowing the catastrophic impact on millions of refugees living in Palestinian territories and other countries in the region. UNRWA is a lifeline for them, a fact that even the clowns in the White House and the State Department don't deny. What was Israel's allegation? Israelis had alleged that 7 UNRWA members out of 30,000 staff of the UN refugee body, 7 employees out of 30,000 staff, had taken part in the 7th of October attacks. Israel did not give any evidence to support its claims, and yet UNRWA terminated the contract of all 7 employees without any delay. The UN launched 2 investigations, one by Catherine Colonna, a former French foreign minister, to come up with a broad range of recommendations so that the UNRWA could further improve its neutrality in how it functions in the region. And the second investigation was by the United Nations Office of Internal Oversight Services, OIOS, to look into the Israeli allegations that some UNRWA staff members had taken part in 7th of October attacks. Colonna submitted her report in April. She praised the functioning of UNRWA, made recommendations for further improvement, and said, this is very important, that Israel had not shared the evidence to support its allegations against an extremely tiny group of UNRWA staff members.
Thank you, Ms. Colonna. Gabriel Elizondo from Al Jazeera English. You stated that Israel has given no evidence to UNRWA about their claims that any UNRWA employees took part in October 7th. But did you, during your investigation, ask Israel for evidence?
Thank you for this opportunity to have me repeating that there must be no confusion between what we've been tasked for, which is assessing whether UNRWA does everything in its power to ensure neutrality and address challenges, and what the OAS is in charge of. There are 2 separate missions. So allegations regarding individuals, a difficult case, are in the scope of the OIOS mission. It is not the scope of our mandate. And by the way, it is no surprise that Israel did not provide evidence to UNRWA, because it doesn't owe this evidence during the investigation to UNRWA, but to the OIOS.
Many countries such as Japan, Germany, Australia, Canada, and Italy resumed their UNRWA funding after Colonna submitted her report. Meanwhile, something sinister happened. And this shows just how sick these American politicians are and to what extent they can go to make Palestinians suffer. Just as Palestinians were dying out of hunger and starvation imposed by Israel's rogue regime, the US Congress announced an indefinite ban on UNRWA funding. The same Congress recently gave more than 70 standing ovations to war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu, a person responsible for slaughtering more than 40,000 unarmed Palestinian women, children, and babies.
These protesters, stand with them. They should be ashamed of themselves.
The funding ban by the US Congress meant that even if the findings of two investigations rejected Israeli allegations, the US government would not be able to fund UNRWA again. Why is this important? It's because the US is the largest donor country to UNRWA with more than $150 million of funding. Just pause for a moment here and reflect that the Biden administration stopped this funding just based on unsubstantiated allegations by Israel. And I will explain what happened to those Israeli allegations in a bit. But let's watch what Matthew Miller said about UNRWA last week, a lie that he's been repeating for months.
Before this congressional action, you announced that the administration would no longer be funding UNRWA, and as far as I know, never lifted that.
We announced a suspension of funding to UNRWA pending the investigation that UNRWA launched.
Yeah.
That investigation is still going. But in the interim, before the time that investigation was finished, Congress enacted a ban.
So your pausing of aid basically precipitated this, it seemed to precipitate a situation where everybody pulled funding from UNRWA, and now you're sort of criticizing other people for cutting off UNRWA or criticizing the Israelis for cutting off UNRWA. But it feels like
that is not what I criticized Israel for. I criticized the verbal attacks and threatening rhetoric and advancing legislation calling them a terrorist organization, which we do not agree with. We've always made clear that other countries have to make their own decisions about funding, and we've seen other countries restore funding. We just simply don't have the flexibility to make that decision because of the action that Congress took.
But the investigation and therefore the decision of this department on whether funding should go to UNRWA from the US is still up in the air. Is there any expectation of when that will be finished?
No, it is because it's a UN investigation. It's not something that we are conducting, so it's not something that we can put a timetable on. They've had two investigations ongoing. Yeah. One of them finished, one has not. But just to go back to the decision we made a decision to suspend funding to UNRWA after there were allegations made about UNRWA employees having been involved in October 7th that UNRWA told us they found credible. And so when you had UNRWA telling us they found credible, we thought that was an appropriate step to do, to suspend funding.
I shall repeat the last lines of Matthew Miller so that there is absolutely no ambiguity here. He said, and so when you had UNRWA telling us they found credible, we thought that was an appropriate step to do, to suspend funding. This was also repeated by John Kirby during his White House press conference on the same day.
Is it or is it not the U.S. government's position that UNRWA is complicit in terrorism?
UNRWA does some things that no other agency can do on the ground in Gaza. You and I both know that. Now, there has been an investigation done to some of their employees, and I understand that there's been some additional claims or charges against additional employees too that have been laid out there, but it's clear to us that UNRWA has taken this seriously. They fully investigated it. They eliminated the employment of those that they believe were involved in terrorist activities. It's absolutely unacceptable, not just to us, but it should be, and we believe it is, unacceptable to UNRWA. But UNRWA is still, and yes, I know we're not providing funding them now because of legislation, but I think it's important for people to know that there are things that can't get done without UNRWA's cooperation and support on the ground.
And the government's position is that those are claims and charges, right? Claims and charges.
Some of them have been verified because they did their own investigation, UNRWA did, and terminated some of those employees. So clearly, there was something to it.
So Miller said that UNRWA approached the US government to inform them how allegations against its own employees were credible. And Kirby said that UNRWA did their own investigation to verify Israeli allegations and terminated the contract of those employees. Both men are lying through their teeth. Here's what actually happened. I'm quoting every information here from the United Nations website. According to UNRWA, the OIOS has been investigating 19 employees, not 7, 19 employees in total, as Israel made allegations against 12 more staffers later. Of that group of 12, 8 staff members continue to remain under OIOS investigation. OIOS has closed one case since Israel failed to give any evidence to support its allegation. UNRWA says it's exploring corrective administrative action since that employee was fired just based on allegations. OIOS also suspended investigations against 3 more employees since evidence provided by Israel was deemed not credible. Regarding the 7 cases that were brought to UNRWA's attention in January, 1 case has also been suspended, pending receipt of additional supporting evidence. The remaining 6 of those cases are currently under investigation by the OIOS. Now, this is the timeline of everything related to UNRWA since the Gaza conflict started. Which bit of information tells you that the UN body ever found Israeli allegations credible or went to the State Department clown with admission of guilt? The question is, why is Israel hell-bent on discrediting UNRWA and destroying every single facility in the occupied Palestinian territories? And why are its allies happy to join Israel in its dirty tricks? The answer is simple. The real motive behind the current conflict has always been to destroy Palestinians, annihilate them, remove their existence completely, and destruction of UNRWA, a lifeline for Palestinians, will help them achieve this very objective. This is a top UNRWA official before the United Nations Security Council on this Friday evening.
UNRWA is the backbone of the humanitarian response in Gaza, but it's facing enormous challenges. Gaza is in ruins. The threat of a larger regional war looms. At the same time, the agency is under unprecedented attack, including imminent threats of being expelled from occupied East Jerusalem and being designated a terrorist organization by the Israeli parliament. Our operating space in the occupied Palestinian territory is shrinking by the day. These developments demand the urgent attention and action of this council.
This is how these Zionists spread misinformation. Lies, when repeated, tend to sound like truth. And it's important that we debunk those lies from this platform. Now it's your job to share this far and wide to defeat these enemies of humanity in their nefarious motive. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.